From a distance, these animals may all look the same. They're all individuals of the same species after all. But if we were to look more closely, we would start to see differences. These differences might be in size, such as height, length, or dimensions of a particular body part, like perhaps the bill. They might be in traits, such as coloration. And if we observe the animals for long enough, we might notice differences in behavior as well. Perhaps some are capable of foraging more effectively for food. Perhaps some are more aggressive or more curious than other individuals in the population. And if we were to look even more closely at traits we could not see directly, biochemical traits such as blood type, we would see differences there as well. Variation is a property of every natural population, from bacteria to fungi to plants to humans. Let's talk about where it comes from and why it's so important. We're going to be discussing only variation that is caused by genetic differences, because that is the kind of variation that is relevant when we discuss evolution. Ultimately, all genetic variation is a result of mutation. Mutations are permanent changes in DNA, and they can be as small as a single base pair being inserted, deleted, or substituted, or they can be as big as a whole chromosome or even a whole genome being duplicated. We are super interested in mutation and variation in biology because without variation, there is no evolution. Let me remind you that natural selection can only occur when there is variation in genetic traits. Organisms that are better suited for their environment and their lifestyle, in other words, individuals whose traits give them an advantage in survival and or reproduction, will tend to leave more offspring than organisms with less favorable traits. This differential survival and reproduction due to inherited traits is natural selection. When biologists talk about fitness, we're talking about reproductive success. Now, many people think of mutations as being bad or harmful to the organism, and sometimes this is true, but not always. In fact, most mutations are neutral with respect to fitness. Let's think about why that is. If we look at the genome, and we'll just use humans here as an example, most of the DNA in the genome is not protein coding. In fact, we currently estimate that only about 2% of the entire genome directly codes for proteins. What is the rest of it doing? Well, the approximately 98% of the genome that's not protein coding includes introns, regulatory regions, sequences for non-coding RNAs, transposons, which are elements that change their location in the genome, and long repetitive sequences that are the remnants of ancient viral infection. So, first of all, you could imagine that a mutation in many parts of your genome isn't going to have any effect on protein function. Now, just to be clear, a mutation does not have to occur in the approximately 2% of the genome that is protein coding to have an effect. Mutations in the regulatory regions, for example, can cause changes in gene expression, which absolutely can matter. And mutations in introns can have an effect as well. Introns can be regulatory, and also a mutation could change how a gene is spliced. But still, there are a lot of places where mutations can happen pretty freely with no effect on phenotype. Okay, so most mutations are neutral or nearly neutral in terms of an individual's fitness, but sometimes we have a mutation that is harmful. There are lots of examples of this. You could think about mutations that cause inherited human disease or disorders. For example, phenylketonuria, Huntington's disease, muscular dystrophies, and hemophilia. And there are, of course, many, many more. Okay, so mutations can be neutral, mutations can be harmful. Can they ever be beneficial? Well, the answer is yes. Let me give you just one example of many. Mammals feed their young milk, but most adult mammals cannot digest milk because expression of the lactase enzyme is severely downregulated once an animal is weaned. This is true for humans too, by the way. Only about a third or so of humans are lactase persistent and are able to easily digest milk. But this trait is not evenly distributed across the world. People with ancestry from Northern Europe and certain populations of Africa and the Middle East are much more likely to be able to digest milk throughout adulthood. And although today this may not provide much of an evolutionary advantage, In the past, when food was perhaps not as easily obtained, milk was an advantageous source of nutrition in certain environments. Lactase persistence is due to just a few genetic variants or alleles. Each of these alleles is a result of a mutation that spread in populations over time because of the selective advantage that it conferred. Mutations occur not just in humans, but in all organisms. And although their effects may not be significant necessarily at the level of an individual, there are many new mutations in every generation of a population. These new alleles are sorted by natural selection, such that those that are unfavorable are reduced in frequency and perhaps even disappear from the population, while those that confer a selective advantage in fitness persist and become more frequent in a population. Over time, this results in a population that's well adapted for its environment and for its way of life.